Right. We're hopefully going to finish the book of 1 Samuel this morning. If you would open your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 30, that's where we're going to be picking up. 1 Samuel chapter 30. And I made a remark last time about how the writer likes to leave us on cliffhangers here. We saw this a little bit in chapter 27. There was this conflict that David had. He was living in the land of the Philistines, and he was faced with the prospect of going up and fighting against his own people. And then the writer just didn't tell us what happened next. Instead, he shifts the view over to Saul. And Saul's over here at Gilboa, and he goes and consults a medium. And the medium informs him, the medium brings up Samuel. Really, Samuel kind of comes up by the power of the Lord, since the medium had no real power, apparently. And Samuel conveyed this information, that Saul and his sons would die the next day. And we think that is surely horrible and shocking, and then the text leaves us on yet another cliffhanger, doesn't tell us what happens to Saul, and instead goes back to David to tell us how that story is going to end. And David is dismissed from the Philistine army, the lords of the Philistines. There would have been 5 lords of the Philistines because of the 5 ruling cities. Achish probably would have been one of them, but Achish gets outvoted in this instance, because the lords of the Philistines do not want David to go with their army. They're afraid he is going to become a sort of 5th column within their ranks. He's going to turn on us, and he's going to endear himself back to his master Saul by taking our heads off. He's going to sabotage our offensive. So no, David cannot go out to battle with us. He and his men are going to be dismissed. And after much protest, David is dismissed and sent back to the town of Ziklag. But that's not where the story ends either, because in chapter 30 we find out that Ziklag itself has been attacked and raided and ransacked. And, well, at this point we've if David hasn't hit rock bottom yet, this would undoubtedly be a very difficult point for him. Somebody go ahead and read verses 1 through 6 of chapter 30. All right. So David comes home to find his town destroyed by the Amalekites, of all people. Why would the Amalekites have it in for Ziklag? Why would they have done this? Revenge? Revenge for what? Say what? I think you're on the right track. Revenge. In a previous chapter, yes. Right. In a previous chapter, David, in chapter 27, David in verse 8, David and his men have been raiding the Geshurites and the Girzites and the Amalekites. There's one of those groups there. And David attacked the land in verse 9 and wasn't leaving man or woman alive. He took away the sheep, the cattle, the donkeys, the camels, and the clothing. So he's plundering them. He's killing everybody so that nobody can escape back and inform somebody about what David's been doing. And then David claims to be making raids on the south country, the Negev, the land of Judah, so that Achish will think David is loyal to him only. Well, in this instance, the Amalekites have actually made a raid on the Negev. And so the raid that David claimed to be making, they're actually making And the people that David was actually raiding against are making the raids now. This is a very much kind of talionic retribution, we might say. The women and the other inhabitants have been taken captive and carried away. And, we might think, well, at least they didn't kill them like David's been killing everybody. Well, being taken captive like this, your prospects are limited. You're either going to death or you're going to a life of hopelessness and bondage and slavery. It's not a pleasant picture regardless. The city has been burned with fire in verse 3. It's very much like the Canaanite destruction that Israel was supposed to bring on Israel. Well, that Israel was supposed to bring on Canaan. And we see how bleak the situation is. David's men are weeping until there's no strength left. And David's wives, they've been taken captive. And everybody else, their family's been taken captive. And all we got left is this little contingent of 600 guys. What are we going to do? Well, what do they think about doing? We're going to take it back on David. Why in the world would you take it out on David for this? He's supposed to stop this from happening, right? And herein we see kind of some of the... we knew that some of the people gathering around David were a little disreputable and discontented. We remember that back from chapter 22. Everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was discontented gathered to him. He became captain over them. 22 verse 2. Well, now here we see that, you can imagine the conversations that were taking place. David, why didn't you leave somebody to protect the town? Why do we all have to go out with the Philistines at Aphek? But David, we didn't even want to come to the land of the Philistines in the first place. Why did you bring us out here? This is not a good situation for the people, and it's not a good situation for David. When your own people in your army are talking about stoning you to death, I think we've hit the bottom. So, how do we get out of this situation? What's the turning point in all this? Do what Saul did. What did Saul do? He forced himself to do wrong, right? Well, is that what David does? He strengthens himself in the Lord. Yes. Well, what does that mean? Okay, prayer. He sends for Abiathar the priest. Why? Why would you send for the priest? To get the ephod? To ask Lord. Yes, it's a inquiry of God. So that's part of strengthening yourself in the Lord. Yeah, those are all good things to bring up. And I think that's definitely a huge part of what strengthening yourself in the Lord is. There's one other thing I want to note. In 1 Samuel chapter 23, there was a very similar statement made in 1 Samuel 23 in verse 16. Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David at Horish, and it said, my Bible says encouraged him, but literally it's strengthened his hand in God. Jonathan, it goes, and he strengthens David in the Lord. And what does that entail? Well, you keep reading in verse 17, do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul my father will not find you, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you, and Saul my father knows that also. And part of Jonathan's method of strengthening David in the Lord was to remind him of God's promises. Well, here Jonathan isn't there to strengthen David in the Lord, but David strengthens himself in the Lord his God. And so perhaps there is kind of a reminding yourself of the promises item that's in here as well. That, God told me that I would be king over Israel, and it looks really bleak right now. But I'm going to trust in His promises anyway. And this is, I think this is a turning point for David in many ways. You can read the Psalms and you can see all kinds of laments and cries of despair in the Psalms, but they all have one thing in common. Who are they all addressed to? They're all addressed to God. Exactly. In chapter 28, Saul was in distress, Saul was in despair, and what does he do? Strengthen himself in the Lord his God? No. You see a lot of lamentations from David in the Psalms, songs of despair. We don't have anything like that from Saul, because Saul doesn't pray to the Lord in his distress. Instead, he goes and he gives up. He consults the witch of Endor. That is a good chunk of why Saul is rejected as king. That's a good chunk of why Saul and David are, so different from each other in many ways. It's not that, the situations they go through are different. It's how they deal with those situations makes all the difference in the world. Well, in this instance, in verses 7 through 10, can I have somebody read verses 7 through 15, actually? Read verses 7 through 15.
Please bring me the ephod. Abiathar brought the ephod to David. David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this man? Shall I overtake him? He said, surely overtake him. All. So David went, he and the 600 men, where there were left behind, where those left behind remained. David pursued 400 men, crossed the brook before behind. Now they found an Egyptian field and brought him to David. They provided him water. Let his spirit revive. Not even bread, but water. David said to him, long. He said, I'm a young man, servant of an animal. Master left me behind. He made a raid on the people, terrified. That which belonged to the burned inside with fire. Then David said to him, swear to me by God that you will not kill me. I will bring it down.
All right. So first, David inquires of God via the ephod. Question, does anybody remember when the last time David inquired of God was? That David inquired of God via the ephod. That's the only way he's ever inquired of God in the text of Samuel. Do you remember? He inquired of God at Nob with Ahimelech, but he also inquired of God one other time in chapter 23. Whenever he was at the city of Keilah. He inquires of God a lot in chapter 23. Should I go up to Keilah? Sure. And the ephod has just arrived to David because Abiathar has brought it with him. But David inquires of God at Keilah, and he goes up and he delivers the city. And then he's in the city of Keilah, and Saul's approaching. David finds out, and he inquires of God and says, are the men of Keilah going to give me into the hands of Saul? And the Lord says, they are going to give you into the hands of Saul. And David inquires again, what should I do? And the Lord tells him, you need to leave. That's the last time we have recorded that David inquires of God, in chapter 23, in that particular scene. And from then on, we've got David doing some good things and some bad things and some things. And, we don't really see him inquiring of God through much of the remaining narrative. It isn't until we get to chapter 30, when he finally hits rock bottom, David inquires of the Lord again. And the Lord proves faithful to his promises. The Lord tells him, yes, pursue the Amalekites. You will surely pursue this band. You will surely overtake them. You will surely rescue all. Actually, no one calls them the Amalekites here. The text, the omniscient narrator in verse 1 informs us that it was the Amalekites who raided and took everything off. But does David know that that it was specifically the Amalekites that just destroyed his city? Did they leave a calling card or something? Did they spray paint graffiti on the walls? Yeah, they kind of left something in their tracks, didn't they? And this is the interesting question. How would David have figured this out had they not found this Egyptian man in the field? Well, So we think that there's more than just a coincidence that they find this discarded slave in the field, the guy that nobody would have thought of. And they find this Egyptian and they provide him with bread and water and fig cakes and raisins. And he apparently hasn't eaten in a while. And the provision of food revives his spirit. And David finds out about this man being a slave of the Amalekites. His master abandoned him when he fell sick. And here we see the Amalekites are just completely undone by the callous discarding of one of their own servants. And the Egyptian confesses, yeah, we raided this area, we raided the city of Ziklag, and these are all the places that David claimed to be attacking earlier. Again, we see the Amalekites have actually been attacking. And they make a deal that in some ways kind of reminds us of Rahab helping the spies or infiltrate Jericho, or the man who helped Israel enter the city of Luz in Judges chapter 1. This guy makes a deal, and he's going to show them how to infiltrate the camp, and in return, what are they not going to do? They're not going to kill him, and they're not going to extradite him, is basically the way it's going to go. And so here we see this man's been left in this field. I think in many ways, it is a providence of God type thing that's going on here, because without this guy, they wouldn't have figured out who the camp was or how to get there. In verses 16 through 20, we have the battle itself described. Can I get somebody to read verses 16 through 20? All right, so they're eating, they're drinking, they're dancing. I don't think that just involved sipping coffee and toe tapping, discussing earlier. But no, in many ways, kind of like Nabal. They're just eating, drinking, drunk, unawares, and then death comes upon them. And they come in retribution. David slaughters the Amalekites. In verse 17, we learn that a handful of men escape. 400 young men on camels rode off and fled. Now, this is not the last time in the Bible we see the Amalekites. There is going to be an Amalekite that kind of shows up on the scene later in 2 Samuel chapter 1. This guy claims to have killed Saul. Perhaps he's looking to get some kind of asylum with David in the process. I do not believe he is telling the truth when he says he killed Saul, because we know how Saul died in the previous chapter to that, in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel. But here we see that when David returns from the slaughter of the Amalekites, it's no coincidence that it's an Amalekite who tries to get into David's good graces and fails to do so. David puts him to death. Oh, yes?
I was thinking about this Egyptian. Providentially,
Yeah.
killed everybody. Quite possibly they would kill this well process. There's also a little bit of years earlier, Israelite man, salvation.
So, Israel escaped from the Egyptians.
Make any more out of it.
Israel escaped from the Egyptians to be attacked by the Amalekites. This Egyptian escapes from the Amalekites to help Israel attack them. I don't know. There's probably a cleverer way to put that together. But what we see here is David slaughters the Amalekites. He recovers the wives. He recovers all that was stolen. What is most remarkable about this battle? Nothing of theirs was missing. Verse 19. Small or great sons or daughters, spoil, or anything that they had taken for themselves, they get it all back. It's really, there's no way to explain that in the normal in the normal courses of warfare. Numbers 31 and verses 48 and 49 describe something similar. Israel goes to war against Midian. They take all their troops out, and they come back and they number the troops, and not one man is missing. Numbers 31 and verses 48 and 49. That's a sign of divine protection right there. In verse 8, you will surely overtake them. You will surely rescue all. And so David takes the spoil back, and it's quite something to see the promises and the providence of God in action here. So the beginning of chapter 30, it was despair. We had been at the rock bottom. It was just total disaster for everybody. His family's been kidnapped. His home has been destroyed. How quickly that gets reversed in the same chapter. That's the work of the Lord right there. We begin with despair and we end with triumph. And then, of course, we have this description of the division of the spoils. All right. Can I get someone who's not afraid of reading a bunch of place names to read verses 21 through 31? Oh, right. Now, division of the spoils. Here we have kind of a problem that's emerged from verse 10. David left 200 men at the brook of Bezor, and they were too exhausted to go into battle, so it's just 400 that go into battle instead of 600. And, well, in verse 21, what's the consensus opinion here? They shouldn't get any of the spoils. If a man doesn't fight, he shouldn't eat. Yeah. The wicked and worthless men have this consensus opinion. Actually, they are once again men of Belial. We keep seeing that expression pop up in Samuel. It's the expression that was used of Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and of the men who opposed Saul, and of Nabal as well. Well, here we have wicked and worthless men saying, they don't deserve any of the spoil. They didn't do any of the work. They shouldn't have any of the credit. They can get back their wives and their children, but we get to keep their stuff. What does David think about that? Not too highly. What does he say about it? All for one and one for all? Why? Yes. Yeah. There's two things here that are being brought out. First of all, who did the real work? The Lord did the real work. This whole mentality of, well, we did the fighting, we deserve the credit. Those guys over there didn't do anything, so they don't deserve any credit. Well, why should the people claim all the spoil for themselves as if they did something great? It's the principle of 1 Chronicles 29:14. There is nothing that we have that is not first a gift from God. And since the spoil was from God, they should not be stingy with it. As they receive freely, freely they should give. Just like Jesus taught, Matthew 10:8. There's this arrogance that comes from enjoying the spoils of victory that mankind is very prone to. Deuteronomy 8 warns against this. You may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth, but you shall remember the Lord your God. For it is He who is giving you the power to make wealth, that He may confirm the covenant which He swore to your fathers, as it is this day. Verses 17 and 18 in Deuteronomy 8. The Lord, we were the ones that did all the work. Well, the Lord gave you the power to do that work in the first place. So who really deserves the credit? Well, the Lord does. And, we see this, this principle is all throughout the Scripture. This need for the equality and sharing. And we see 2 Corinthians 8 verses 12 through 15, for instance. Paul taught this principle regarding to the distribution of funds to the saints. When he says that if the readiness is present and acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. For this is not for the ease of others and for your affliction, but by way of equality. At the present time, your abundance being a supply for their need, so that their abundance also may become a supply for your need, that there may be equality. As it is written, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little had no lack. The other thing we need to note, the other principle I think is important here, is that the share of one going into battle is the same as the one of the share of the man who stayed behind to watch the stuff. It's not like these guys didn't do anything. They had a role to play. They had the task of watching the baggage. This is crucial. This shows how people in the Scripture shows here how people who have different roles can still be equal in their value. Now, perhaps someone in the battle thought, well, we're doing the harder work, so we deserve more. Perhaps we're doing the flashier or the more obvious work, but the person fighting the battle is not inherently better than the person who's had to stay and guard the supplies. They were both necessary. Stuff wasn't going to get done without both of them, and they both deserve the same reward. It's like a parable in Matthew 20 where man goes out to hire slaves, and he hires some people at the beginning of the day and says, come work with me, I'll pay you a denarius. And so they go out in the field and they work and they labor. And then the man goes out and he hires some more people a few hours later, and he hires some more people a few hours later, and we get to the 11th hour of the day. There's only 1 hour left to work. And there's still some people hanging around. And this master says, well, what are you doing here? And the slave said, well, no one has hired us. He says, well, come work with me. And so they go, and they work for a grand total of 1 hour. And he starts, at the end of the day, he starts dispensing payment, and he gives these 1 hour workers a denarius, a day's wages. Some of the other people standing around who he hired at the beginning of the day start to get excited, and they think, oh yeah, I'm surely he's probably pay me a little extra, right? And they gets to them, and here's your denarius. What? Well, how come you gave them a denarius? And he basically rebukes them at that point. He says, my money is free to do with as I please. I agreed with you for a denarius. Why are you getting upset? Because I am generous. They are all given the same wage, even though they did not all work the same amount. That is an interesting principle there. And the reason is because pay is not based on how hard one works, but on how generous master is. In the same way, Israel's spoils are not based on how hard they fought, but on how generous God is. Keith, you have something. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an attempt to get the men guarding the baggage back into his... I think there's probably something to that. Yeah, I mean, it's... it's been difficult because, 200 are too exhausted to follow along, and, we want to keep the band together, ultimately. We want to keep the group of people there. I think there may be something to that as well. Why turn these 200 guys against you? There's a practical consequence. You don't want to create a band of 200 guys who suddenly have no place to go whatsoever. That's a good point to bring up. Yeah. Now, David not only sends the spoil to them, he also sends spoil to people that weren't even involved at all. People throughout Judah, the elders in Judah, some of his friends, and there's a whole list of cities here. There's some, manuscript variants on this list, but it's a list of cities in Judah when you boil it all down. Now, what the point of all of that is, in some ways, I think, of course, it's David's generosity, once again. It's also connected with this. There's a little political maneuvering going on here because these are the cities where David is soon going to have to make his bid for the kingship itself. When we get to 2 Samuel chapter 2, it's the men of Hebron and Carmel and all these other places that decide to get together. In other words, it's all the men of Judah who decide to get together and make David king in 2 Samuel chapter 1. That is what takes place there. So that's how David divides up the spoils. Any comments or questions to the end of chapter 30? Chapter 31. Can I get somebody to read the first 7 verses of chapter 31? Okay, the Philistines defeat Israel. This is, I think, the last time we saw the Philistines actually win a battle was in 1 Samuel 4 when they captured the ark. They don't, for all of the ferocity that gets assigned to the Philistines, there are not a lot of battles that the Bible records where they actually win. Maybe there's battles that the Bible doesn't record where they win, but it's interesting anyhow that there's really only a couple of battles where they win that the Bible records. And of course, why is Israel defeated before the Philistines? Why is Israel ever defeated before the Philistines? It's because God's not happy with them usually. There's some kind of problem. They and their king have finally paid for their sin. The tragic note of the chapter, I think, is really in verse 2. Because the first recorded death is not Saul, but Jonathan. And Jonathan is killed along with Saul's 2 other sons. This is, I guess in many ways, kind of the sad thing. Jonathan never gets to realize the thing he said to David, you will be king over Israel and I will be next to you. Well, that doesn't happen. Jonathan does not get the chance to see David as king, even though he had been speaking of that promise quite frequently. In fact, Jonathan never gets to become king, even though he was the obvious choice for the throne. Now, there's a lot of different ways this could have gone, but I think that the real message of this is, Jonathan gave up a kingdom that he was never going to have to obtain a kingdom ultimately that he could not lose. And so while we see there's a tragic ramification to Jonathan's death, if God is faithful and if there's truly a hope and a promise that the Lord is faithful to those who are faithful to him, then we can hope that Jonathan would have a future resurrection as well. So in that sense, he gives up the kingdom he cannot have to obtain the kingdom he can never lose. Saul is critically wounded by archers. It's kind of similar to how Ahab later gets killed at Ramoth Gilead in 1 Kings 22. Saul instructs his armor bearer to kill him. What does this sound like? Tells his armor bearer, kill me before before these uncircumcised people take advantage of me and make sport of me. Not Samson, although there might be there are some similarities to Samson. Huh?
They took him alive and made him.
That's true. With Samson, they actually took him alive and made sport of him, and maybe Saul's trying to avoid being made like Samson. Of course, he still winds up in the Philistine temple just like Samson did. So, dead or alive, you're going to go to the temple and get made sport of. There's another character this reminds us of too, though. There's only one other person in the Bible I know of who actually instructed his armor bearer to kill him. Earlier story. Judges. Chapter 9. Really, really bad judge. Not even a judge, really. Yes, Abimelech. Israel's only other attempt at a king prior to Saul is Abimelech. And Abimelech, he goes and he starts raiding various cities. And in one instance, a woman drops a millstone out of the tower and it lands on his head. And Abimelech says, he turns to his armor bearer and he says, kill me so they won't say I was killed by a woman. Of course, later on in 2 Samuel chapter 11, Joab says that Abimelech was killed by a woman, so that plan didn't work out very well. But it's still interesting, Saul's manner of death is in some ways, or at least he seems to want to die in a way that's similar to Abimelech. The difference, of course, is that in this case, Saul's armor bearer refuses. He is afraid to kill Saul. Perhaps like David, he fears to stretch out his hand against Yahweh's anointed. In 1 Samuel 24 and 26, David kept making this point. And later on, an Amalekite shows up and claims to have killed Saul at his request in 2 Samuel 1. David doesn't take too kindly to that because that's still stretching out your hand against the Lord's anointed. And you should have been afraid to do that. The fact that the Amalekite story is different from the one that's told here is almost certainly evidence of the fact that he is lying. And perhaps he witnessed, he knows a little bit of the details. Perhaps he witnessed the exchange between Saul and his armor bearer and figured out what was going on and tried to recast himself into that role when he lied to David. In any case, his plan backfired. When the armor bearer refuses to kill Saul, Saul kills himself. And in so doing, Saul joins the ranks of Ahithophel, Zimri, and Judas in becoming one of the few biblical named characters who committed suicide. 5 if you count the armor bearer. I guess 6 if you count Samson. Samson's case is interesting in and of itself. But the armor bearer kills himself, an indication of the situation is how desperate everything is. Samuel's prophecy is fulfilled. Saul and his sons die on the same day. And in verse 7 we learn that the Israelites in nearby cities abandon their dwellings and the Philistines take some cities back. And they've this is not a happy day for Israel. Once again we see that 1 Samuel ends on a note of despair. Then, verses 8 through 13, read the aftermath of it. Can I get one person to read that? Verses 8 through 13.
The next day, when the found Saul, his son Saul, on the mountain of Boa. They cut off his head and stripped off his weapons and brought the land of the carried his goods to the house of their idols. He put his weapons in the temple of Ashtaroth, fastened his body. Now when the inhabitants heard what the Philistines unto Saul, all the valiant men rose and walked all night, and took the body of Saul and the body of his son, the wall of Bethshan. They came to Jabesh and burned them there. They took their bones and buried them under the
All right. So here we see the triumph of the Philistines in the morning of Jabesh Gilead. The Philistines, of course, reclaim a bunch of cities. They strip the slain. They claim Saul's body. against Saul's wishes. Even though Saul didn't want the uncircumcised Philistines to make sport of him, that's what they wind up doing anyway. He's just dead while they're doing it. They cut off his head, just like happened to Goliath. And like the Ark of the Covenant, they install his weapons in their temple and display his body on the wall of Beth-shan. These are our trophies. We have won. And in so doing, like the capture of the Ark before, the defeat of Saul may have given the enemies of Yahweh occasion to blaspheme. But the Lord will ultimately make that right when David defeats the Philistines later. But there is a bright spot to all of this. The men of Jabesh-Gilead arise and they recapture Saul's body and the bodies of his sons, and they burn them and then bury the bones. Why would the men of Jabesh-Gilead do a thing like this? Right. The one positive accomplishment in Saul's life, the deliverance of Jabesh-Gilead, and they live pretty far away. They live east of the Jordan, actually. So they would have had to come a long way to get into hostile territory just to get the body and give it a proper burial. This is a way of showing respect for Saul. For the men of Jabesh-Gilead, Saul was a national hero. And so the book kind of ends on the note of, here's the one thing Saul did right. Of course, it's not really the end of the book. 1st and 2nd Samuel were originally one book. And when we read 2 Samuel, we learn that the situation is not ultimately so somber. Because now with Saul removed and taken out of the way, David becomes king. And he becomes the king after God's own heart, who does the Lord's will. That's the end of 1 Samuel. Anybody have any comments or questions?
God put some of the irony.
Yeah.
Say there's any relationship. It struck me that Eli fell off the bench backwards. Died in the Ark of the capture. Here, Saul killed himself after his son.
Yeah, there's definitely a parallel between Eli and Saul in that he and his sons die on the same day, and then the Philistines take a trophy after the fact, and both of them get their death oracle from Samuel, and there's a couple of other parallels too. But it's interesting to note that, just as the book began with judgment on the bad leadership of Eli's sons, it ends with judgment on the bad leadership of Saul himself. Lots to see there. Anything else? All right. Well, this is the last class before I leave for India, and Dennis will be teaching through next quarter. And I don't remember what he plans to teach on, but when we resume at the first of the year, I'm hoping to pick up 2 Samuel. So thank you all for your attention.